with the first lecture of this hour, and that is, of course, by Suskin of South Africa, MA in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology, University of Wales, and his lecture topic is the Astrology of Dreams. Well, something very interesting is about to happen, so let's see what Mr. Rod has in store for us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, my topic of dreams might come as a little bit of a surprise to some people because astrologers don't usually think of themselves as interpreters of dreams. Astrology is many things, though, and one of the things it has been, at least for some people, since very ancient times, is a form of divination, trying to find out what the gods want from us or what something means. And the tools to interpret dreams with astrology exist since ancient times. The information I'm going to share with you today comes from the medieval Syrian astrologer Sal, who lived in the 9th century, who's also known to us as one of the people who brought Ptolemy back into our tradition by translating him into Arabic. But what is important about the technique that he shares with us is that it is simple. It uses the astrology we already know. It doesn't require us to learn any special technique, any special knowledge. It actually uses very simple, basic astrology, but it allows us to use a set of symbols that we already know and that we've already established very well to understand the mystery of dreams. Unlike perhaps other methods of dream interpretation, which require either some other kind of knowledge, perhaps psychology, or a particular view of the world, Sal's method sticks to astrology and astrology's view of the world. Every astrologer is different. Everything that you've studied or qualified in is different. So certainly, those who know psychology might bring their own knowledge in addition. But what the astrological method allows us to do is to create a starting point to talk about dreams with the client so that they can understand and perhaps further explain to you what has been happening in the dream and in their lives. One of the things we know about dreams is that they're very difficult to remember for most people. Sometimes people only remember the smallest piece of a dream. But with your ability to actually talk about symbols that they dreamt, you will often jog their memories and help them report more of the dream to you, related to the chart that you want to use, and eventually, hopefully, find out what that dream means to them, again, using astrological methods. The introduction to this method that I'm showing you today will make use of the natal chart and the horary chart. Even transits can be used. We don't need to go beyond all of that. But what's insightful to us about using those things is that this method of dream interpretation takes the client's temperament and personality into account. Because you're using the same chart that you use to discover and describe everything else about this person, we can actually see it in the context of the person. Each of us, to some extent, has our own dream language, and the chart will reveal that, how their language tends to work when the dream is trying to tell them something. We have many different kinds of dreams. Perhaps some dreams are prophetic. Certainly some dreams don't even mean anything, or might just be what happened that day. There's no one explanation for what a dream is. What we will do with the astrological method is that when we identify what their own basic language of dreams is, when we hear them using that language to describe a dream, then we'll assume that this dream is probably something their unconscious is trying to tell them. So we listen out for the use of their own language. Because we use horary charts as well, we can still go beyond that in some way. So in the example that I'll show you, I will also make mention of the client's natal chart and where we find that language. But where the experience starts for ourselves and our client is when they come and see us, the consultation. So we will treat it as a kind of horary chart. We can't ask a person what time they had the dream. They don't know that. And even if we had to say, when did you remember the dream? Well, that's a little vague. We often don't remember it as one piece, and that is something difficult to report. We have a well-established rule in horary astrology that says when you, the astrologer, understand the question, you are able to draw a chart. So essentially the question is, what does my dream mean? And we'll use these rules for horary astrology to identify the dream, relate that perhaps to their own language if we have their natal chart. You know, in a horary situation, we don't always have that. And then we assign the symbols in that way to their dream. So using that along with their life circumstances, we hope to give them insight into why did they have that dream, and then perhaps they can go into their lives to sort that out. Some of Stahl's rules get a little bit complicated, but we can keep it simple. And what I hope as well is that because it's simple and basic, a lot of the information can be used in Vedic astrology. You might have to adapt some of your significators, perhaps you use different significators for the dream itself, but the basic rules of interpreting the planets will travel to some extent and perhaps show places where the two astrologies do meet, which is something we'd also like to see. So, as a horary chart, of course, the ruler of the first house, and sometimes the moon, can be used to describe the dreamer, the querent. Dreams themselves traditionally are found in the ninth house. Usually in most traditional practice, also in Vedic astrology, it is the ruler of the house that is the most important planet of that house. But even though that still is true, Stahl prefers to use any planets that you actually find in that house. And even if you don't find planets in that house, he will first look for angular planets before he looks for the ruler of that house. The fact, as we know, that planets in the angles are always strong planets. So it's sensible, logical to use strong planets to assume this is the influence or this is what's going on for him. So planet in the ninth is preferable. If there isn't one in the ninth, Stahl says go for one in the 10th, and if not that, one in the first. If you still haven't got one and you're beginning to feel desperate, the 7th house and the 4th house in that order will be used. Stahl goes on to say, and it's an interesting challenge to the client, that if you still haven't found a planet, if there are no angular or 9th house planets, the dream has not been correctly reported. Maybe the dream simply doesn't have a meaning, but that itself can be an interesting place to start the conversation and perhaps suggest something else that you might see in the chart. Usually, people come to us because a dream is disturbing. It might be what we think of as a nightmare. It is creating fear. So very often, what we are looking for is what is causing the dream to happen. That's very often what is the fear. It's not the only reason they come, but it's the usual reason, or the anxiety or something that is uncertain. So let's assume for this purpose we're using the planet you found in the 9th house, but in your individual case it might have been one of the 10th house or the 1st house planets that you've had to resort to. So every planet rules at least one house, often 2 houses. Whatever houses that planet rules shows us where the dream is coming from, what is the anxiety and what is the fear. And the other planets that it connects with, the planets that that significator has aspects with, shows us what in their lives is being affected by that dream. So we see where the dream comes from and what the effect of the dream is on their lives. With this information, we want to give them understanding. We are always at first on the lookout for where the south node, K2, is, because that planet features strongly with fear. And it's very common. In many of the examples I've worked with clients, you will find K2, the south node, in the 9th house, along with whatever planet you might be looking at. And that immediately tells you it's fear and anxiety that is driving this dream. Sometimes you will find those characteristics, we all know them in dreams, being chased, feeling threatened, or something is attacking you. Those are south node dreams, although we'll see that Saturn can also be guilty of causing that for us as well. The planet itself, though, that signifies the dream should be fully delineated to see how positive or how negative that planet is. But each of those planets is associated with some certain basic ideas, certain basic meanings. And when talking about this, this is when you often cause the client to remember something about their dream that they didn't necessarily tell you. It's very helpful. These are very traditional meanings. You can extend them yourself. I think certainly at first, when working with the client and working with a dream, we don't want to improvise too much about the meaning. We first want to get some purity, some basic ideas from the chart. Then in the conversation, we're going to take that further, and we can bring in other symbolism that we begin to see. But we want to start with the idea that the chart will guide me even if I don't have psychology or some other knowledge of dreams. The moon often figures very strongly in dreams, especially since it's got a connection with water. And water is a very prominent dream symbol, especially in disturbing dreams. So look out for the moon as well. The classical ideas of the sea and all of those kind of things can come up, flooding, and especially older women, which you'll see in the example that we look at, comes up as well. So we can always try and identify individuals. Mercury is also an important figure because there are many disturbing dreams that are associated with information that you can't access. Another common dream, for example, something is written down but you can't read it. Or you get given some very important information, you wake up, you can't remember what was written, and it's driving you crazy. So that whole idea of direct communication from the dream world is what Mercury is all about. The other very common dream symbol that we give to Mercury is journeys. So traveling and unending traveling is a common symbol in disturbing dreams, is running or being chased or missing the train or something like that. Those kind of things have to do with Mercury. And then Venus, who also symbolizes women in dreams and things we love, for dreams sometimes that have a sexual quality to them, because some of our passions tend to come out in our dreams when they don't come out elsewhere in our lives, or perhaps even when they do. So that those planets can be, those very personal planets can be very important planets that you're looking out for. The sun is less common in most dreams, but it has an association with another type of dream that people often ask about, and that is, I was dreaming I was flying. So there are all sorts of meanings that are given to that. I always heard that that means that you're out of your body while you're sleeping. That's not the territory of astrology to know. But flying dreams, you look out for the sun, or when you see the sun in the 9th house, you ask about that. Always, when interpreting dreams, like with other personal work that we do with people, we don't want to plant ideas in their heads, especially because the dream is vague and the memory is vague. And strangely, people feel a little bit stupid for not remembering the dream, even though all of us know we don't remember them. It's very easy for them to take on the ideas that you give them. So that's why we're starting what I call pure. You try and keep it simple and provoke a memory, but not give them what you think it is. Let it come from them, and you will use the dream to explain it. Then there are dreams of anger and aggression and violence and conflict. Of course, those belong to Mars, as sometimes do fire dreams. We'll see that fire and water, common symbols for frightening dreams, we can even find more easily than this in a moment. And then Jupiter, money. The other thing that we dream about, because we usually don't have it, or we have fears about it, or we want it, or something like that. Our spiritual lives can come through Jupiter. Jupiter in those situations is often not the ninth house planet, but it's aspecting the ninth house planet. It somehow is being supportive, and that's often how Jupiter works. Saturn, of course, is the classical fear planet, and so other than the south node, you'll also find fear, dark places, horror, terror that I can't see. Saturn is dark, it has a blindfold, that unspoken fear, I don't know what it was that was chasing me, I couldn't see it. That's Saturn. The north node traditionally has a nature similar to Jupiter, so things that we like, and the south node, as I said, things that are attacking you in some way. Many of us use the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as well. And although Saul doesn't talk about them, writing in the 9th century, it's not so difficult to see how we can apply basic symbols even from those planets to give us an idea of what must the dream be, because we're sticking to very standard astrological ideas. We're not trying to introduce anything new to the planets. So we can do that for Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto as well. Uranus perhaps represents fires, explosions, sudden changes, unexpected things, surprises. Neptune, things that are vague, confusing, or a vision that you can't quite make out. And of course, water as well, that other common dream symbol. And Pluto, dare we even talk about it, things that are very destructive, things that come to an end, also things that are fearful and unseen. So that you can experiment with, and in the example that I'll show you, you can see how they probably do play into the dream of the client that I talk about as well. What's also interesting for you as an astrologer is that you can also learn something about your basic astrology from listening to them talk about the dream and seeing what you're seeing in the chart. Because we're trying to stick to these pure kind of rules, sometimes the client will give you details and you realize, of course, that also belongs to that planet in the 9th house, or perhaps it might make you realize, maybe I should use the ruler of the 9th instead of the planet in the 9th. As astrologers, we sometimes have to make judgments, and one of the judgments we frequently have to make is which planet is the correct significator. And although Saul gives us his rule that says first the planet in the 9th, then the angular planets, sometimes it will be very clear to you that it is the ruler of the 9th who's actually talking about the dream. So from my own experience, I find that you must check on that and see perhaps that's a better word for what they are talking about. In analyzing the dream, the two most important places we're going to look are the first house, which is the dreamer, the querent, the client, and the 9th house, which is the dream itself. And keeping it simple, we try and use aspects as simply as possible. Later in the conversation with the client, we can use the aspects to better understand the effect in their lives. But following on Saul's example, if you stick to a basic principle, Venus, Jupiter, often the sun, and perhaps the moon, often are supportive planets, and they can show us there's help coming from somewhere. That's a very traditional way to use them that often is helpful in helping a person feel that they can make use of the dream. Where can you find help? And of course, Mars, Saturn, and perhaps the outer planets can sometimes cause trouble in a way that you can identify for them, and even there, show some of the obstacles they might be facing. If the outer planets can surface some of what's affecting the dream, something that's disturbing them is causing that dream imagery to occur. So you're giving them some of the information and they're giving you some of the information. And in doing that, you can sometimes identify what the unseen fear actually is. And they're telling you, I couldn't see it, it was chasing me, I don't know what it is. From seeing the aspects to the dreaming planet, you might be able to understand or suggest carefully what type of thing it might have been. Certainly, you will give them somewhere to put their attention that you can perhaps understand, that they can understand where there's an obstacle or a cause of that in their lives. There's also something really useful about the moon, as there always is in horary astrology. It's always got so much to say there, and that is whether the moon is in a fixed sign, a cardinal sign, or a mutable sign. I said it in that order because fixed is more important. When the moon occurs in a fixed sign in a dream, it usually means this is a very significant dream, it's affecting you, you need to deal with it. When it's in a cardinal sign, it means the effect might not be immediately obvious. So you might need to wait to see what it was doing in your life, and it's often less dramatic. And in a mutable sign, it can mean the dream isn't so significant. It might have still been a frightening dream, but we want to be able to do what I was saying at the beginning and identify when a dream is perhaps just the mind working on something, or perhaps it's a fear that is so trivial in their lives, doesn't seem so to them, that we could say, don't worry, it's really not as important as you think. The other thing that's really useful about very basic ideas is the sign that the significator is in. And Sol just uses the element of the sign. You can go further and also use characteristics that you know from the sign itself, but that can help us understand basic imagery as well. So obviously, air, high places, the air, those are falling from a great height or being blown around. Back home in Cape Town, that's something we dream about a lot, wherever you have wind. More commonly, earth, which is one of the fearful elements, being surrounded, being in dark places, being in narrow places, not being able to escape. Those are often when the significator is in an earth sign. Fire, of course, fire, but fire is often fear of or death in a dream. Not necessarily the death of the person. People are able to dream about their own death, even though there's a common belief that they don't, but people do report those dreams. Or just dealing with death and all of that kind of drama. Also, frightening things, not as bright as you would expect for fire, gloom and doom and fog and those kind of things. And water again, the element that's always in dreams representing itself, drowning dreams or submersion in water. It is important that we don't take it too literally. So as much as water can represent drowning, it doesn't always mean drowning in water. It might be being overwhelmed by something. We use the expression drowning even to talk about how much work we have to do. So I'm drowning in work. Be aware that the symbols, the elemental symbols, can be worked that way. So a very basic set of tools. Let's see how it applies. Firstly, this is Rudy's natal chart. I call him Rudy here and Samuel in the text, so I make up names for people all the time. So never keep track of the fake names. So Samuel called me because he had this repetitive dream. If a dream keeps on repeating itself, that can also be an indication it's trying to tell you something. It might be important information. So he was having these dreams over and over again, and he finally called me close to his birthday. He'd had the dream the night before, and he couldn't understand what was going on. So if you have a look here, you can see his 9th house is Virgo, ruled by Mercury. So we know for him that when he has a dream that's trying to tell him important information, we'll probably see Mercury symbols in it. He might dream about journeys, he might dream about information written down, or like I was saying, pieces of paper and things like that that he can't understand. We can also look at the context of his Mercury. It's in the 5th house. So Mercury might also have to do with children, not surprisingly for a planet that anyway often represents younger people. His romantic life or things that he loves, things like that. He doesn't have a very strong Mercury. So for him, those Mercury symbols will probably come up as sometimes troubling. He's not likely to get information that makes him think, wow, I've discovered the secrets of life. He's more likely to have a dream where he can't understand the information. And also, since Mercury also rules the 6th house in this chart, he might have dreams either about illness or about thankless work. You know how Mercury can represent things that drain us, work that we don't get acknowledged for and that drains us, or that is just really very hard work. So those might be his symbols as well. You see in his natal chart he has Jupiter in the 9th house, and that Jupiter is in its detriment in Virgo. So it's not very capable of producing good results. Traditionally, they say that when Jupiter is detrimented, it either won't produce any of the good it promises, or it will produce it and then it will fall apart. So it's difficult for him to find the good. Also rules the 12th house. So perhaps he dreams, his language of dreams is when he is his own enemy, which we give to the 12th house. In Western astrology, we also give spiritual meanings to the 12th house. Perhaps he's concerned about his spiritual life when he dreams about Jupiter as well. Jupiter is a good planet though, even though it's in Virgo, and perhaps it suggests that, well, things might sometimes be better than he thinks in those dreams. So generally speaking, when things are not working for him, we'd expect to have dreams involving those symbols. So this is his dream. First, I need to tell you the dream itself. I'll tell you what you can't see there. He dreams that he is a delivery man. He's riding around on a bicycle, and he has to get something somewhere. That's that strange dream of, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what it is. He said it's either a package or a message that I have to give to someone, but I don't know where I have to go. The person who told him to deliver this was a woman who was his boss, his employer, 20 years before. He had a difficult relationship with her. She was always criticizing him, and she was very particular and very fussy. Driving his bicycle, he was going through buildings, through dark alleys, through narrow passages, and water all the time, sheets of water. He kept on driving through sheets of water and then slipping in the mud. And finally, he finds himself backstage. You know how dreams suddenly change. And he's backstage, he's got to perform, and he doesn't know what the words are. He doesn't know what he's supposed to say, and there's a whole audience waiting to hear from him. And he doesn't even know what they expect and what play he is in. So he's lost the information. He never completes the task. He never gets the sense that he delivers anything. So the chart of the dream itself for the question. So Virgo is on the ascendant, and it is in fact almost at exactly the same degree as his 9th house. And that gives us a good indication. This is Rudy using his own dream language. That's a good sign for it. I've already heard about journeys. I've heard about information. I know that this is his language that he uses. Very appropriate symbols. Looking at the 9th house, we see the moon in Taurus. So the moon can symbolize water, it can symbolize women, and in Taurus, of course, it can symbolize dark places, being surrounded, narrow alleyways, and of course, put water and earth together and mud. These are all the symbols that he has described to us, so we know that that's appropriate. Venus, traditionally that Venus would often be described as being in the 10th house, but whether it's in the 9th or the 10th house, it clearly has a lot to do. It rules that 9th house. So Venus, of course, is a powerful woman. She's sitting at the midheaven, and that is the boss that he talks about. Also, sitting in Gemini, so we might see her fussy, critical qualities as well. And if you look carefully, you'll realize the south node is there too. Western astrologers have a tradition or a habit of only drawing the north node. But we can draw in the south node. You'll see the north node is in the 3rd house. So obviously the south node, Ketu, is in the 9th house. And so it's a fear dream as well. Also worth mentioning that the moon is in late Taurus, where there are many difficult stars. And that can also indicate the nightmare and some of the problem and so on. The moon rules the 11th house. The source of the fear comes from whatever the planet rules. The 11th house is groups and ideals, but it's also a money house. As the 2nd house from the 10th, the money I get from work. So those are the two possibilities. Now we can look more closely and understand what perhaps is worrying Rudy. Notice also Saturn sitting on the second house cusp. That makes me think about money again. And I'm thinking maybe he's feeling restricted in his money. So I can suggest that to him. But Saturn is in Libra. So I'll say to him, but why do you feel restricted? You still have some money. You might not have a lot of money from your job, but Saturn has dignity and suggests that you are getting paid for what you do. Maybe he just doesn't get enough. With Mercury, with Virgo, even with Gemini, he is feeling so criticized. But where does Mercury, the ruler of that 9th house, the ruler of him, where does it sit? It sits in the 7th house. Nothing to do with his boss. It in fact sits with Uranus and squares Pluto. Sitting in the 7th house, we think it must have something to do with his marriage. And indeed, with Uranus and Pluto, there is uncertainty and anxiety connected with his marriage. So now I've got something to suggest to him. I suggest to him perhaps the criticism, perhaps what he has to deliver is the money. Perhaps he feels he's not bringing home the money in his marriage. So I ask him about money from work and whether he gets enough. And he says, well, yes. So I said, is this an issue at home? Does your wife criticize you for that? He says, no, my wife makes much more money than I do. So she never even talks about money because we've got plenty money. So you'll see, in fact, that the ruler of the 7th house is also, well, it's in his natal chart. The ruler of his 7th house is Mars in the 8th house, the wife with the money. But now we've got enough information to understand the dream. He fears that he is not making enough money in the eyes of his wife. And he fears that she is secretly thinking critically of him. He knows that this is an irrational fear because they have a close relationship and they never talk about money, so they've never spoken about this. And he knows it's ridiculous, but unconsciously he's anxious and he's fearful that maybe she thinks less of him. So when I told him this, it was like a light switched on in his head. He suddenly recognized that that is exactly what he thinks. And he just never admitted it to himself. He didn't want to feel ungrateful. He didn't want to feel sexist. He didn't want any of those things. But this gave him the opportunity to understand, I secretly fear, and now I can have a conversation with my wife and clear the air about money, clear what she feels. And he was able to go back home, sort it out with the wife, and he never had that dream again. There's a lot more complexity you'll find as your clients bring it to you, but I hope you have seen that with the most basic symbols, we're able to understand and, most importantly, help our clients understand the dream. Thank you.